The dropships broke through the clouds like silver insects, scattering trails of vapor as they descended toward the green expanse below. Arthuan 9 looked peaceful from orbit, a world of dense forests and misty lakes. But from the moment the cadets stepped out of the ship, peace dissolved into suffocating humidity and noise. The air vibrated with the sound of unseen creatures, the earth pulsed with moisture, and the towering trees oozed resin that smelled like burnt metal. Liam Cross tightened his grip on his knees as he crouched at the edge of the clearing, watching the alien cadets fan out across the mud. He could already see it in their eyes, uncertainty wrapped in arrogance. The Galactic Academy's emblem shone on their chests, but no symbol could shield them from the heat that clung to the skin like a fever. The instructors had given them one rule, one that made Liam's stomach twist: no tools, no crafting, no manipulation of the environment. The survival trial of Arthan 9 was meant to test endurance, not intelligence, they said. The aliens accepted this with a quiet kind of pride, as if their biology would be enough to carry them through. Some had claws, some had armored scales, others could secrete protective oils or breathe filtered air. Only Liam stood bare, his human body glistening with sweat and insect bites, unshielded and unevolved. He listened to the announcement echo through the translator device. Any construction of tools or use of external material will result in immediate failure. You are to endure, not to invent. The instructor, a towering crystalline being named Varu, looked directly at him when speaking the last part, as if the rule had been crafted solely for him. Liam had seen that look before, across every academy hall and training field, the quiet disbelief that a human could belong among the galaxy's apex species. Humans had become a rarity in the academy, admired for their stubbornness, but distrusted for their unpredictability. When the test began, the cadets dispersed into the jungle in organized groups. The insectoid Drixians carved shallow burrows with their limbs. The aquatic Raelans built mud domes to trap condensation, and the feathered shear looked for shaded roots to rest under. Liam moved slower than the others, scanning his surroundings, memorizing the flow of the terrain. The ground was soft, soaked by constant rainfall, and every step released a faint smell of rot. The plants were alien, thick, fleshy things with translucent veins pulsing faintly under the light. He knelt beside one and pressed his fingers into the soil, feeling its damp breath. The place was alive in ways he couldn't fully grasp. Hours passed, and the temperature rose until the air felt too heavy to breathe. The others worked tirelessly, relying on their physical gifts. A Drixian cadet, his carapace shining green, snorted at Liam as he sat under a tree. "Human," the alien clicked through the translator, "your soft hands will not last a cycle here. You should have stayed on your metal worlds." Liam didn't answer. He stared at the alien's claws, sharp and efficient. He thought of how every species here had been built by evolution to survive, while humans had survived by cheating evolution itself, with fire, blades, and invention. To strip that away felt like stripping away what made him human at all. By nightfall, the first signs of exhaustion showed. The air turned colder, and the shrill calls of unseen predators echoed from the dark. The cadets gathered in a clearing, forming small clusters around faint thermal lights that the instructors had allowed. Liam sat apart, wrapping his arms around his knees. His rations were sealed within protein pods, impossible to open without tools. He watched one alien bite through his pod using serrated teeth, another tear it with claws. He tried to tear his own with bare hands, but the synthetic casing refused to break. He looked around, no one was watching, and smashed the pod against a stone. The casing cracked slightly, leaking a trace of liquid. He froze, half expecting an alarm or a voice from the sky to announce his disqualification. Nothing happened. The forest only whispered back. The next morning, hunger gnawed at him. His muscles ached from the damp cold, and his body was covered in bites from the tiny flying creatures that nested in the underbrush. The others had already begun mocking him more openly, calling him the toolmaker without tools. He tried to ignore them, but the frustration simmered beneath his skin. When he walked to the river to drink, he noticed the way its stones caught the light, smooth in some places, jagged in others. He picked one up, running his thumb along its sharp edge, feeling the small cut it made in his skin. He stared at the bead of blood and thought of the first humans who had done the same on Earth, thousands of centuries ago. He could almost hear their voices whispering through time, telling him that survival was not about following rules. It was about rewriting them. But the rule of helplessness weighed heavily. Every action was watched, every word recorded by the instructor's drones that floated silently overhead. Breaking the rule meant failure, expulsion, and disgrace, not just for him, but for every human cadet who might come after. He lay awake that night listening to the rain, watching droplets fall through cracks in the canopy. He imagined each drop as a thought falling into his mind, eroding resistance grain by grain. What if the rule itself was the real test, he wondered? What if they wanted to see who would dare break it? When dawn came again, one of the cadets, a feathered seer named Cell, collapsed near the food storage unit. Her body trembled, her skin pale beneath the feathers. She had been bitten by a small reptile that carried a paralyzing toxin. The others panicked, crowding around, unsure what to do without medical tools. Liam rushed to her side and saw the faint swelling along her leg. He knew what it meant. He had studied field medicine, basic toxin extraction, and wound pressure techniques, all requiring tools. But he had none. He looked around, spotted a vine with fibrous strands, and tore a piece off. The bark scraped his fingers raw, but he twisted it tightly, forming a makeshift tourniquet. The others shouted that it was forbidden. He ignored them, tightening the bark until the bleeding slowed. He used a broken shell from the riverbank to scrape away the venom where it had pooled, pressing his shirt against the wound to absorb it. The Kyr's breathing steadied, and the panic quieted. When the instructors arrived minutes later, they recorded everything but said nothing. The incident was logged as unconventional intervention. The other cadets looked at him differently that evening, some with gratitude, others with fear. To them, what he had done was a violation, but also a miracle. He had proven that life could be preserved through disobedience. That night, as he sat by the dying glow of the thermal light, he stared at his hands again. They were blistered, bleeding, shaking slightly from exhaustion. But there was something else there too. Purpose. He knew he couldn't last the trial by endurance alone. His body wasn't made for this planet, but his mind was made for creation. Every fiber of him screamed to build, to shape, to transform. The instructors wanted to see if he would surrender his nature. He decided he wouldn't. The next day, he began to explore further from the camp, tracing the edges of the rocky ridge that bordered the forest. He gathered small fragments of stone, feeling their weight, studying their fractures. He didn't act yet, but in his mind, the idea was forming, a forbidden spark waiting to ignite. As the sun fell behind the mist-covered peaks, Liam sat alone beneath a massive root, staring into the darkness. The forest around him seemed to breathe, as if aware of his thoughts. He whispered to himself words he had once heard from his grandfather back on Earth. When the world tells you not to build, it's because it fears what you'll become when you do. The silence swallowed his voice, but the meaning stayed. He clenched his fist around the sharp stone he had picked earlier. The rule of helplessness had been written to break him, yet in his mind it had already begun to crack. The morning mist lay thick over the jungle, muffling the cries of the unseen creatures that moved between the roots. The cadets had begun to weaken. Their supplies were dwindling faster than expected, and without tools, even opening rations had become a humiliating struggle. The dampness had soaked everything. Their clothes, their shelter fabrics, even their spirits. Liam woke up shivering under a canopy of broad leaves he had arranged above his head during the night. His fingers were stiff, his stomach empty. Around him, the air was heavy with the sour odor of decay. He knew that this was the day he would either adapt or give up. He would not choose the second. He left camp quietly before most cadets stirred, stepping into the undergrowth with cautious precision. His boots sank into the mossy ground as he followed the stream that wound through the jungle's heart. The water glimmered faintly, reflecting the emerald canopy above. Every sound felt amplified in the stillness. The hiss of small reptiles, the click of his heel against rock, the rhythmic thud of his heartbeat. His mind had settled into a kind of clarity born from desperation. The rule forbidding tools was carved deep into his thoughts, but the more he fought it, the more it felt unnatural. Humans had not survived by surrendering to nature. They had survived by reshaping it. He crouched beside the riverbank and examined the stones scattered across the mud. Many were smooth from centuries of water flow, but a few had jagged edges. He picked one up and struck it lightly against another. The sound echoed sharp and metallic. He tried again, this time harder, and the stone split along an irregular line. The fragment that broke off had a cutting edge, thin, glinting faintly under the morning light. He ran his thumb along it and felt the sting as it sliced the skin. Blood welled up bright against the gray stone. He smiled faintly, whispering, "Good." He worked slowly, methodically, choosing pieces that seemed to fracture well and shaping them with patience. Every strike sent a satisfying vibration through his hand, the same rhythm that had once pulsed through the veins of his ancestors on another world. When one piece chipped too much and lost its edge, he discarded it, learning from its failure. Within an hour, he had several pieces, primitive but sharp. The act itself filled him with something close to reverence. It was not rebellion anymore. It was instinct. The forest watched him, silent and vast, as if aware that something ancient had awakened again within its borders. By midday, the sun had burned through the mist, and the air shimmered with heat. Liam returned to camp carrying his small collection of stones wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from his uniform. The others noticed immediately. A Drixian cadet with an emerald exoskeleton crossed his path, clicking his mandibles in mockery. "You break rocks now, human? Will you eat them when food runs out?" Liam ignored him and knelt near the remains of his rations. He picked one sealed pod and pressed the sharp edge of his stone against the casing. With a controlled motion, he cut through it cleanly. The sound was crisp, satisfying. The pod split open, and the scent of nutrient paste filled the air. The laughter stopped. The Drixian tilted his head, and several others turned to look. No one had been able to open a sealed pod without assistance from instructors or natural tools. Liam dipped his fingers into the paste and ate slowly, feeling their eyes on him. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, one of the avian Kier, her feathers damp and dull, stepped closer and whispered, "You broke the rule." Her voice trembled between awe and fear. Liam looked up at her. "No," he said softly, "I followed it differently." She stared at the shard in his hand as if it were a weapon. Word spread quickly through the camp. By the evening, even those who mocked him were asking questions. How had he made it? Could he teach them? Was it safe? He did not offer to help, nor did he hide what he had done. He placed one of his sharper stones near the communal area where the cadets gathered for the night. Some approached to look but dared not touch. The instructors' drones floated overhead, their sensors humming faintly, watching. No alarms sounded, no reprimands were delivered. The silence from above was both approval and threat. It told him that someone was paying close attention. As darkness fell, the jungle came alive with sound. Screeches echoed from the trees, and glowing insects drifted like embers through the air. Liam sat by a small pool, sharpening one of his stones against another. The repetitive motion calmed him. Across the camp, a Drixian cadet cut his hand trying to break open a food pod. Blood sprayed onto the ground, and the others panicked, calling for help. Liam approached, still holding his sharpened stone. The Drixian hissed at him in warning, but Liam ignored it. He tore a strip from his own sleeve, pressed it against the wound, and used the flat edge of his blade to clean away the dirt. The alien flinched, but allowed it. When it was done, the bleeding slowed, and the Drixian looked at him with something that resembled respect. The next morning, a new tension spread through the group. The instructors had not punished Liam, and that silence emboldened some of the cadets. A few attempted to mimic him, smashing stones together near the riverbank, but most gave up quickly. Their movements were clumsy. Their hands were too large, too rigid, too soft for such delicate control. Liam watched them from a distance, fascinated. He realized that toolmaking was not only a matter of thought, but of feel. The subtle understanding of how one material yielded to another. His body carried that memory even if his species had long forgotten where it began. He decided to refine his work. He experimented with different types of rock, learning their patterns, their fractures. One type crumbled under pressure, another dulled too quickly. But one, a dark volcanic glass he found embedded near the stream, cut with a precision that amazed him. He spent hours chipping away until he created a blade so fine it could slice through the thick vines that hung from the trees. When he finally tested it, cutting through a plant that had resisted every alien claw, he felt the strange rush of victory. It was not about defying the rule anymore. It was about rediscovering what he was. Later that day, he used his blade to help a few cadets open their rations. Some accepted the help reluctantly, unwilling to admit their dependence on him. Others looked at him as though he were doing something dangerous but necessary. The Drixian who once mocked him now followed his movements closely, memorizing the rhythm of his strikes. Liam said little, letting his actions speak. The human part of him, creative, stubborn, endlessly curious, was coming alive with every motion. That night, as the cadets gathered, a murmur ran through the group. Some spoke of rebellion, others of survival. The seer who had warned him before now approached quietly and sat beside him. She studied the stone knife resting on his knee. "You know this will not go unnoticed," she said. "When the instructors act, they will not punish you alone." He turned the blade in his hand, watching how the light caught its edge. "Then let them," he said. "If rules kill us, then they were never made to protect us." She didn't reply, but her feathers ruffled in unease. When the last of the light faded, the jungle swallowed the camp in darkness. The hum of the drones overhead continued, patient and mechanical. Liam lay awake, listening to the steady drip of water from the canopy. His blade rested beside him, its edge glinting faintly in the dim light. The rule that once felt absolute had cracked open, just like the stone he had split that morning. He understood now that this was only the beginning. There were other materials waiting: bark, fiber, resin. His mind traced possibilities, designs, and uses. He smiled to himself, already imagining the next step. The first tool was born, and with it, the illusion of helplessness began to die. The sun returned with brutal intensity, turning the jungle into a steaming chamber of light and moisture. The air was so thick that breathing felt like drinking from a swamp. The cadets no longer moved with the same discipline they had at the start. Fatigue was painted on every face, and even the strongest among them began to stumble under the unrelenting heat. The trial was meant to last 7 planetary cycles, but for many, survival had already turned into a slow, silent collapse. Liam had learned to move early, before the worst of the sun, scavenging while the others rested. He carried his stone blades wrapped in cloth, hidden from the drone's gaze, and ventured deeper into the forest where the trees grew thicker and the air cooler. He no longer thought about the rule. He thought about progress. He followed the sound of running water until he reached a small ravine lined with sarku trees, tall bark-skinned giants whose roots twisted like coiled serpents. Their trunks shed long ribbons of fibrous material that hung loosely like wet paper. He pulled one strip and tested it between his fingers. It was rough, but when twisted, it became surprisingly strong. His mind filled with memory fragments, images of ropes, knots, bindings. He began to peel more, coiling the fibers into bundles. The bark's inner layers were soaked in sap, which glued the strands together slightly as he twisted them. It reminded him of the way his ancestors had made cordage from vines and sinew. He sat on a flat rock and worked for hours, his hands moving with quiet rhythm. He twisted, looped, and tightened the fibers, using his thigh as an anchor. Sweat poured down his neck, but he didn't stop. When one strand broke, he wove 2 together. By midday, he had a length of rope thicker than his thumb. He pulled on it with all his strength. It held. The simple success filled him with a strange kind of joy, a sense of control in a place that had stripped everyone of power. When he returned to camp, the others were trying to rebuild their makeshift shelters after a storm had swept through earlier that morning. Most structures had collapsed, and the ground was littered with broken supports and soaked cloth. He watched a cheer cadet attempting to prop up a shelter with wet branches that bent under the weight. Without a word, he walked over and tied the branch ends together using his rope. The structure immediately stabilized. The seer stared at him with disbelief, touching the rope as if it were some forbidden magic. "You made this?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "From the sarku trees," he said. "It's strong enough to hold more than that." Others gathered quickly, curious. The Drixian who had once mocked him crouched beside the rope, testing it with his claws. The texture resisted his grip. "You weave bark," the alien said slowly. "You bend what should not bend." Liam didn't answer. He simply tied another knot to demonstrate how the fibers reinforced themselves when twisted properly. It was a simple principle, but the effect was undeniable. By the afternoon, he was helping to repair several of the shelters, using rope to secure crossbeams and anchor corners. The camp transformed from chaos to order in a few short hours. That night, as the cadets sat in the dim glow of the thermal lights, the air felt different, quieter, more cooperative. No one spoke of the rule anymore. Hunger and exhaustion had softened pride. A few cadets even approached him privately to ask for pieces of rope for their own shelters. He gave some away and taught others how to make it. The forest had become his teacher, and now he was passing that lesson forward. Yet he felt the invisible eyes of the drones above, circling like metallic vultures. The instructors were watching, but still, there was no intervention. The silence from above had turned into complicity. The following morning, a storm unlike any before swept across the jungle. The wind howled through the canopy, ripping branches free, and the rain came in sheets that struck like whips. The cadets clung to their shelters, shouting over the noise. One of the Drixian tents tore from its anchors and rolled toward the ravine. Without thinking, Liam grabbed one of his ropes and ran through the storm, mud splashing up to his knees. He tied one end around a tree and hurled the other toward the cadets trying to pull the tent back. The rope strained under the force of the wind but held firm. Together they pulled until the structure was safe again. The storm raged for hours, but when it finally passed, the camp was still standing. The cadets were soaked and trembling, but alive. When the instructors' ships descended that evening to check on casualties, they found none. The commanding instructor, Varu, stood silently at the edge of the camp, crystalline body reflecting the fading light. His gaze fell on the web of ropes stretched across the shelters, binding them together like veins. He approached Liam, who was sitting near the fire pit, drying his hands. "This was not permitted," Varu said, voice echoing like glass. Liam looked up, meeting his eyes without fear. "Neither was dying," he said simply. The instructor's body flickered with internal light, a sign of irritation, but he said nothing more before turning away. After the ships left, the cadets surrounded Liam. No one called him reckless anymore. The Drixian who once mocked him offered a piece of fruit in quiet gratitude. The cheer smiled faintly and whispered, "You saved us." He shook his head. No, the forest did. He didn't believe in miracles, but something about this place, the rawness of it, made him feel as though the planet itself responded to intent. When he worked with his hands, the forest seemed to yield, as if acknowledging his purpose. As days passed, his ropes spread through the camp like veins of connection. He began experimenting with different fibers, mixing bark with vine to create stronger cords. He braided thinner strands into nets, which he hung near the river to catch drifting pods of edible algae. The others followed his lead, cautiously at first, then eagerly. Soon, a quiet system of exchange developed: food for rope, shelter for tools, assistance for knowledge. The trial's meaning had shifted. It was no longer a test of endurance, but of ingenuity. The cadets began to depend on what they once feared. One evening, as the camp settled into rare calm, Liam climbed the slope overlooking the forest. From there, he could see the glow of the camp through the mist, flickering faintly like a constellation of hope. He thought of the instructors above, watching from orbit, debating whether to punish or praise him. He didn't care anymore. He had come to realize that rules built by comfort failed in the face of survival. What mattered was not obedience, but understanding. The kind of understanding that could bind life together, strand by strand, like his ropes. When he returned to camp, the others were asleep. He sat beside the dying fire, holding one of the ropes in his hand. It was rough and uneven, yet strong enough to pull a tree branch from the ground. He studied its twists and knots, seeing in them the reflection of human persistence, how imperfection itself became strength when woven with purpose. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "We were never meant to survive alone." The forest answered with a faint rustle, as if agreeing. The next day brought new challenges. A section of the ravine collapsed, cutting off access to the river. The cadets panicked again, but Liam saw opportunity. Using the ropes, he began to construct a bridge from the fallen trunks, guiding others to tie knots where strength mattered most. The bridge was crude, swaying dangerously, but it held. As the first cadet crossed safely, a cheer rose from the group. For the first time since landing, laughter filled the jungle. It was rough and exhausted, but real. That evening, as the sky bled orange over the horizon, Liam looked at his hands. The skin was torn, fingers covered in small scars, but they were hands that had changed the outcome of an entire group. He no longer felt like an outsider. The cadets might never fully understand what drove him, but they had learned to trust what he built. The ropes that bound their shelters now bound them to each other. The jungle had stopped feeling like an enemy. It had become a collaborator in survival. He fell asleep that night, listening to the creak of his ropes swaying in the wind, their rhythmic groan echoing through the camp like a song. He didn't know what the instructors would decide, or how long this fragile peace would last, but deep down, he knew that something irreversible had begun. The first stone had cut, the first rope had bound, and now creation itself had entered the trial. The rules of the academy were no longer in control. The forest and the human mind were rewriting them together. The days that followed brought a silence heavier than the storms. The jungle, usually alive with sound, seemed to hold its breath. The cadets moved cautiously, glancing at the sky more often than at the ground, aware that the instructor's observation drones had increased in number. Their metallic shapes hovered above the camp, silent and watchful. No one spoke about it, but everyone knew what it meant. The academy was preparing to respond. The rope bridge, the shelters, the tools, all of it had turned the trial into something else, something the instructors had not planned for. Liam could feel the weight of their gaze pressing against his back, even when he couldn't see the machines. He tried to keep the camp calm. The others had grown used to relying on what he built. And now that comfort had turned to fear. The cheer cadet who once thanked him for saving her now avoided his eyes, whispering that perhaps he had gone too far. The Drixian, however, stood by him, arguing that no rule could outweigh life itself. The group was split, some ready to defend him, others desperate to distance themselves. Liam watched them argue and felt a strange detachment, as if the trial had ceased to belong to any of them. It had become something larger, something between him and the unseen figures orbiting above. That night, a light descended from the sky, cutting through the mist like a blade. The dropship landed in the clearing with a hiss of steam. The cadets gathered in silence as Varu, the crystalline instructor, stepped out, his transparent body glowing faintly with internal light. His face, sharp and angular, reflected the firelight from the camp. He walked straight toward Liam, each step precise and measured. "Human cadet Liam Cross," he said, voice resonating like struck glass. "You have violated the foundational rule of this examination." His tone was calm, but beneath it lingered the threat of absolute authority. Liam rose slowly to his feet. The air around him felt charged, and even the insects had gone quiet. "You mean the rule that forbids survival?" he asked. A faint shimmer passed through Varu's body, a sign of irritation. "You were told not to manipulate the environment, not to craft or construct," Varu said. "Your actions have contaminated the purpose of this trial. You turned endurance into invention." Liam met his gaze steadily. "I turned death into life," he said. "If that breaks your rule, then perhaps your rule was never meant for living beings." A murmur rippled through the cadets. Some flinched at his defiance. Others looked inspired. Varu raised one hand, and the drones descended, forming a glowing ring above the camp. "You will surrender all unauthorized materials," Varu said. "Your tools, your ropes, every object you have altered. The penalty for refusal is disqualification and expulsion from the academy." The silence that followed was suffocating. Liam's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't move. Around him, he could feel the others waiting to see if he would submit or resist. He looked at the shelters held together by his ropes, at the bridge he had built across the ravine, at the food nets hanging near the river. Each piece carried the sweat and pain of survival. To give them up would be to erase everything they had accomplished. He took a deep breath. "If I give them up, the camp will fall apart," he said. "If you want to destroy what keeps us alive, you'll have to do it yourself." Varu tilted his head slightly, his crystalline face unreadable. "You misunderstand," he said. "The purpose of this test was to understand the limits of obedience. You have shown the limits of rebellion." Liam stepped closer, the firelight catching in his eyes. "Rebellion?" he asked quietly. "No, I just refuse to die to make a point for your data logs." Varu's glow intensified. "You mistake insolence for courage. Your kind always did." His words struck like shards of ice. The other cadets shifted uneasily. The tension was a living thing stretching between them. Then, unexpectedly, the Drixian stepped forward, standing between Liam and the instructor. "He saved us," the alien said firmly. "Without him, this camp would be bones in the mud. If that is rebellion, then we are all guilty." Others joined him, first the Kier, then a Raelan, then more. One by one, the cadets stepped forward until only a few remained behind. Their unity was hesitant but unmistakable. Varu watched them, the lights inside his body flickering rapidly, as if processing multiple calculations at once. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he turned his gaze back to Liam. "You believe you have proven something," Varu said. "That defiance breeds innovation, but what you have done is more dangerous than you realize. You have reignited what the galaxy feared most, the human compulsion to reshape reality." Liam didn't answer. He couldn't. The words hit something deep within him, something that both frightened and exhilarated him. Varu's voice softened slightly, almost reflective. "There was a reason your species was restricted from certain programs. The others build to survive, but humans build to dominate. You cannot stop creating, even when forbidden. It is both your strength and your flaw." The instructor paused, then extended a crystalline hand. "End this now, and your record will remain untarnished. Continue, and you will stand alone against the Academy." For a moment, the camp fell into absolute silence. The rain began again, falling in fine mist through the treetops. Liam stared at the instructor's hand, glimmering under the stormlight, and then at the faces around him, some afraid, some hopeful. His throat tightened. He thought of the first stone he had broken, the first rope he had tied. Every creation had begun as an act of defiance, not against authority, but against despair. He slowly shook his head. "I can't unmake what's already been made," he said. "If survival is a crime, then I accept the sentence." Varu's glow dimmed. He turned away, his voice colder than before. "Then your trial ends here." The drones shifted formation, projecting beams of light that scanned the camp. One by one, they vaporized the ropes, cutting through shelters and nets with surgical precision. The cadets shouted in protest, rushing to stop the destruction, but the beams ignored them. The bridge collapsed into the ravine, the shelters tore apart, and the forest filled with the sound of unraveling fabric and splintering wood. When it was over, only the rain remained, falling through the ruins of everything they had built. Varu looked back at Liam one last time. "Let this lesson stand," he said. "Creation without permission is chaos." Then he ascended into the dropship, and the vessel lifted off, vanishing into the mist. The silence that followed was unbearable. The cadets stood among the wreckage, drenched and stunned. Liam felt the ache of failure in his chest, like a physical wound. The things he had built were gone, but the knowledge of how to build them remained. That, he realized, was something no rule could erase. He began gathering what little remained. The broken bark, the stones scattered by the drone's blasts. The others watched him, uncertain, until the Drixian stepped forward again. "You'll do it again," the alien said quietly. "Even if they destroy it." Liam looked up, meeting his eyes. "Yes," he said, "because they can't destroy the idea." The alien nodded slowly, understanding. The others began to help, wordlessly collecting fragments from the mud. The camp would never be the same, but it would rise again, born from defiance and shared will. That night, Liam sat by the remnants of the fire, staring into the dim embers. The rain had stopped, and the air was still. The drones had withdrawn, perhaps satisfied that punishment had been delivered. Yet deep down, he knew the real test had only just begun. The Academy wanted to see how far he would go without permission. He intended to show them how far humanity could go without fear. He closed his eyes, exhaustion settling into his bones, but his mind remained awake, restless and alive. The jungle no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a forge. Every drop of rain, every broken branch, every scar on his hands was part of something greater. He whispered to himself, voice barely audible, "If creation is rebellion, then we were born rebels." The forest, ancient and vast, seemed to agree. Somewhere in the darkness, the sound of new rain began again, slow and steady, washing over the ruins as if preparing them for rebirth. The jungle awoke under a gray dawn, its canopy dripping with the remnants of the night's rain. Mist hung between the trees like breath frozen in air. The camp stood in ruins, shelters torn, ropes reduced to ashes, the ground scarred with the black traces of drone beams. Yet among the wreckage, movement began. Liam was already awake, kneeling beside the fallen trunk that once served as the camp's meeting bench. His fingers worked silently, stripping bark, twisting it into thin strands. The others watched him from a distance, not daring to speak. There was something different about him now, calmer but harder. He no longer looked like a cadet on trial. He looked like a man who had already chosen his side. The Academy's dropships had vanished into the clouds the previous evening, but the silence they left behind was louder than any storm. No new orders came, no food deliveries, no communication. It was as if the instructors had erased the trial entirely, leaving the cadets to fade with the forest. Some whispered that the exercise had been terminated and that they were now considered lost. Others believed it was another test, to see if they could endure without guidance. Liam didn't speculate. He had stopped caring about what the Academy wanted. The only thing that mattered now was survival and meaning. He stood and tied 2 lengths of newly made rope together, pulling them tight. His hands were raw and bleeding, but his eyes were steady. The others slowly approached, drawn by quiet necessity. "The bridge," the Drixian said. "We need it again." Liam nodded. "We'll build it stronger this time." He looked up at the sarku trees surrounding the ravine. The bark glistened with morning dew, waiting. The forest had destroyed what the Academy built, but spared what he created. It was as if the world itself recognized intention over command. He cut into the bark with one of his stone blades, and the fibers came free easily, sliding through his fingers like living thread. The cheer cadet joined him, carefully gathering the strands he dropped. Others followed. By midday, the camp had come alive again. The sound of work replaced silence. Stones being chipped, ropes stretched, wood carved into shapes. Liam coordinated quietly, guiding hands rather than commanding. The cadets who once feared his defiance now mimicked his methods. For the first time, no one looked toward the sky for approval. They looked at the forest, at their tools, at each other. The camp was no longer an assignment. It had become a living testament to choice. As the bridge began to take shape again, the Kier approached him. Her feathers shimmered faintly in the light that filtered through the leaves. "You know they're still watching," she said softly. "The drones may be gone, but the Academy never stops recording." He smiled faintly. "Then let them see what happens when we stop obeying." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "They'll call this rebellion," she said. "Or evolution," he replied. That night, after the bridge was finished, a small fire burned in the center of the camp. The cadets sat around it, their faces illuminated in the warm glow. The mood was solemn, but resolute. Liam sat opposite the Drixian, sharpening his blade slowly. "We can't stay here forever," the alien said. "If the instructors won't come, we must leave the zone." Liam nodded. "We will, but not as cadets." The Drixian tilted his head. "Then, as what?" Liam paused, watching the sparks rise into the night. "As beings who learned what the Academy tried to unteach." The words hung in the air like a vow. The following morning, something unexpected happened. A new ship descended, smaller and quieter than before. It bore the emblem of the Galactic Council, not the Academy. The cadets froze as its landing jets kicked up dust. From the vessel emerged not an instructor, but an observer, an older alien wrapped in white robes that shimmered faintly with embedded light. His eyes, large and colorless, studied the camp with an expression that was neither approval nor condemnation. He walked straight to Liam. "Human cadet," he said, "you have disrupted an entire examination program. The Academy requests explanation." Liam stood his ground. "We survived," he said simply. "That's the explanation." The observer tilted his head slightly. "At the cost of breaking every protocol designed to measure cooperation without interference, you introduced variables, tools, constructs, influence." Liam's jaw tightened. "I introduced hope," he said, "and understanding." The observer was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he asked, "Do you believe your defiance should be rewarded?" Liam shook his head. "I didn't do it for reward." The observer turned his gaze toward the cadets, then back at him. "The council is divided on how to proceed," he said. "Some argue that your actions prove humanity remains a threat to structured order. Others say you have demonstrated the essence of adaptability, the very thing the Academy was meant to cultivate." He stepped closer. "What do you think, human?" Liam took a breath. "I think the Academy forgot why survival matters. You wanted to see how much suffering we could endure without tools. But survival isn't just endurance. It's creation. It's taking what exists and making it better. Without that, life is just waiting to die." The words lingered in the humid air. The observer's eyes flickered faintly with internal light, as if processing something beyond human comprehension. Finally, he spoke. You have forced us to remember what we once feared and respected. Perhaps your species still carries something the others lost, a hunger to change. He stepped back, signaling to the ship. You will not be punished, he said, but your name will be recorded, and the next generation of trials will not forbid creation. When the ship left, vanishing into the clouds, the camp was silent again. The cadets looked at Liam as if seeing him for the first time. Some smiled faintly, others simply nodded. He felt no triumph, only a quiet exhaustion that went deeper than the body. He sat on the edge of the ravine, watching the rope bridge sway gently in the wind. The jungle stretched endlessly before him, alive, untamed, unconquered. That evening, as the sky turned violet, he found himself alone by the water. The reflection of the setting sun rippled across the surface, broken by drifting leaves. He picked up one of his old stones and turned it in his hand. The edge was dull now, chipped from use, but it still caught the light just enough to glimmer. He smiled, remembering how it all began, with a single strike, a spark of defiance. Now that defiance had reshaped an entire system. The others approached him one by one to say their farewells. The trial was over, even if the academy had never formally ended it. Transports would arrive the next day to take them back to their respective worlds. The cheer stopped beside him last. You changed something none of us understood, she said softly. Even if the council forgets, the cadets will not. He nodded. That's enough. She looked at the blade in his hand. Will you keep it? He turned the stone once more before placing it gently on the ground. No, he said. Let it stay here. It belongs to this place now. When morning came, the transports appeared over the horizon, their engines humming softly through the mist. The cadets gathered their few belongings. Liam stood at the edge of the forest one last time. The trees swayed in the wind, the ropes creaked on the bridge, and somewhere in the distance, a creature called out, a sound half roar, half song. He breathed deeply, feeling the heavy scent of rain and earth fill his lungs. Before boarding, he knelt beside the rope bridge and tied one final knot, pulling it tight until it held fast. It was not necessary, but it was symbolic, an unspoken promise that what had begun here would not unravel. He rose and walked toward the ship without looking back. In the weeks that followed, reports spread quietly through the Academy networks. The Arthuan incident became a topic of debate across the Galactic Council. Some instructors called it a failure, others a revelation. But somewhere deep within the archives, the Council sealed a new directive into the training program. The next survival trials would no longer ban the creation of tools. Instead, they would require it. And in the hall of the Academy, beside the ancient emblems of the founding species, a new display appeared, a rough stone blade and a fragment of rope preserved in glass. Beneath them, a single inscription read, "When survival demanded obedience, he built instead." Liam never returned to Arthuan 9, but in the quiet corners of the galaxy, his story became legend. Some called him the Maker, others the human who broke the rule. But among those who truly understood, his legacy was something simpler, a reminder that creation was the highest form of survival. And in that truth, humanity had reclaimed its place among the stars.